My name is Raymond Hullbrook, and I'm 45 years old. 3 months ago, I was worth nearly $7 million. I owned a successful plumbing supply business, lived in a 6-bedroom colonial house, and had 2 kids in college. Today, I'm about to tell you how losing everything led me to discover something that changed my entire life. When my ex-wife Veronica and her lawyer boyfriend stripped me of everything and laughed in my face, I thought I had nothing left to live for. But sometimes God works in mysterious ways, and the biggest blessings come disguised as the worst disasters. "Rye, you're pathetic," Veronica had said, standing in the courthouse hallway with Dennis Caulfield's arm around her waist. 20 years of marriage, and you never saw this coming. Some businessman you turned out to be? Dennis smirked as he adjusted his Italian suit. "Nothing personal, Raymond. Well, actually, I guess it is personal now." They both laughed, the sound echoing off the marble walls like a knife twisting in my gut. That moment broke something inside me. Not just the betrayal, it was the humiliation. She didn't just leave me. She took pleasure in destroying me. Within 2 weeks, I was forced to sell my house. My business assets were frozen pending reevaluation of marital distribution, and I was living out of a month-to-month rental room above a hardware store. My kids stopped returning my calls. My so-called friends disappeared. The only thing I had left was a 2008 Ford pickup with 220,000 miles on it, and a box of papers the court forgot to seize. For a while, I blamed everyone. Her, him, the courts, the system, God himself. But rock bottom has a funny way of forcing you to see what you missed when life was comfortable. And buried inside that forgotten box was something I never expected. The first breadcrumb of a trail my grandfather left behind decades ago. One that would lead me somewhere no court could ever take from me again. And that's where everything began to change. After the courtroom humiliation, I had no choice but to start over from scratch. My life, which had once been so orderly and predictable, now felt like a shattered puzzle. Each piece scattered in directions I couldn't control. Veronica and Dennis had stripped me of nearly everything. The house, the business, even my access to the bank accounts we had shared. My credit lines were frozen, my reputation damaged, and my kids were distant, likely influenced by their mother's constant manipulation. I moved into a modest rental above a local hardware store, surrounded by the smell of paint and plumbing supplies. A stark contrast to the polished marble floors and chandeliers I had taken for granted. Every day, I sifted through the paperwork and court documents, trying to understand the full scope of what had been taken. I quickly realized that my ex-wife had planned this meticulously. Every loophole, every signed agreement, every legal clause had been exploited. Dennis, with his polished suits and smooth legal mind, had practically written the blueprint for my destruction. And yet, amid the chaos, there was a strange glimmer of hope. In the box of old papers I managed to keep, what the court had overlooked, I found letters and documents from my grandfather. He had always been a man of secrets, quietly amassing wealth in ways I barely understood. There were old bank statements, legal forms, and a few handwritten notes, faded and nearly illegible. One note stood out. "Raymond, if you ever lose your way, follow the accounts from 1960. They will guide you." I couldn't help but feel a rush of both hope and confusion. My grandfather had died decades ago, leaving behind an empire of investments that I had never truly explored. Until now, I had thought those documents were simply old papers, memorabilia of a man I had loved, but never fully understood. But now, in my darkest hour, they became a roadmap, a lifeline to something that could potentially undo what Veronica and Dennis had taken. I started to research the 1960 account mentioned in the note. It wasn't easy. The banks had changed names multiple times. Records were archived in boxes in distant storage facilities, and the old financial jargon required translation. Every phone call and email was met with bureaucracy and delays. I felt like I was chasing a ghost from another era. Yet the promise of justice, and perhaps revenge, kept me moving forward. Even as I dug deeper, I had to live in my new reality. Renting a small room, working odd jobs to cover expenses, and maintaining a minimal presence in my kids' lives was humbling. But the struggle sharpened my mind and my resolve. I realized that Veronica and Dennis had underestimated me. They believed that taking my wealth equated to breaking me. They were wrong. As days turned into weeks, small pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Old bank ledgers, coded letters, and cryptic notes all pointed to assets that had been forgotten, legally hidden, yet still mine by right. And though I had lost nearly everything in the present, I was gaining something more important: knowledge, strategy, and the first real hope of reclaiming what was stolen. At that moment, I made a silent promise. No matter how long it took, No matter the obstacles, I would follow the trail my grandfather left behind. I would outsmart the people who thought they had destroyed me, and I would take back my life, every bit of it. And as I traced the first clues of that 1960 account, I couldn't help but wonder how much of what my grandfather left behind had been waiting for me all these years. How many lives could be rebuilt with a secret that had been forgotten for decades? Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let me know. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more shocking true stories of betrayal and revenge. Following my grandfather's cryptic note, I plunged headfirst into the search for the 1960 account. Each day was a mix of frustration and small victories. I called banks, contacted financial archives, and sifted through decades-old statements and legal forms. Every lead seemed to take me further back in time, before computers, before digital banking, when everything was handwritten and meticulously recorded. The more I uncovered, the more I realized the genius of my grandfather's foresight. Meanwhile, Veronica and Dennis weren't idle. They flaunted their stolen wealth, hosting lavish parties and making public appearances that reminded me of everything I had lost. But their arrogance became my advantage. They believed I was broken, helpless, and defeated. Little did they know, I was getting closer with every document, every obscure clue, and every late-night research session. One night, while examining a stack of old bank ledgers, I noticed a pattern. Certain account numbers, initials, and dates corresponded with properties and investments that no one had touched in decades. It was as if my grandfather had anticipated trouble and left behind a trail specifically for me. My heart raced. If I could follow it correctly, I might be able to recover not only the $6.7 million they had stolen, but also assets that even I hadn't realized existed. During this process, I also had to rebuild my own credibility. I reached out to old colleagues, auditors, and financial experts who could verify the authenticity of the documents. Some were skeptical at first, dismissing the idea of a hidden account from 1960 as impossible. But once I presented the evidence, the same shock and disbelief I had felt when Veronica betrayed me mirrored their expressions. I was finally being taken seriously. The tension built as I uncovered each new clue, knowing that Veronica and Dennis would stop at nothing to prevent me from reclaiming what was mine. I began to piece together the network of accounts, hidden trusts, and property investments. Every discovery felt like stepping into a treasure hunt. Only the stakes were my family, my future, and my dignity. And through it all, I reminded myself why I couldn't give up. Veronica thought she had won. Dennis thought his schemes were foolproof. But I had something they didn't. Knowledge of the past, patience, and a trail my grandfather had left behind for decades. If you're watching this and enjoying the story so far, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell, because what happens next will completely blow your mind. By the end of the third week, I had a breakthrough. A particular ledger revealed an account tied to a forgotten trust fund, untouched since 1960, with enough capital to cover the stolen $6.7 million and more. My pulse quickened. Finally, I was not just chasing a phantom. I was on the brink of vindication. But the closer I got, the more dangerous it became. Veronica and Dennis were still around, and their influence ran deep in legal and financial circles. Every phone call, every bank inquiry, and every new discovery had to be handled with the utmost caution. One wrong move could tip them off. As I closed the ledger that night, I realized the battle was far from over. But for the first time since the betrayal, I felt hope. Hope that I could reclaim my life, my money, and my dignity, and that the people who had laughed at me in the courthouse would soon learn the price of underestimating Raymond Hullbrook. The breakthrough with the 1960 account put me in a dangerous position. I knew Veronica and Dennis wouldn't sit idly by while I traced my grandfather's hidden fortune. Every day, I felt their eyes on me, even if they weren't physically present. The feeling of being hunted was real, and it made every discovery more thrilling and terrifying at the same time. It started with a call from Dennis, the smirk still evident in his voice. "Ray, you really think you can fix this? You've lost already. Just accept it." His tone was smug, confident, like he had seen every possible move I could make. I swallowed my anger and calmly replied, "You underestimate me, Dennis. Big mistake." The following days were a blur of late-night meetings with auditors, tracing account numbers, and decoding decades-old legal documents. Every clue I uncovered brought me closer to the hidden trust fund. I found old letters my grandfather had sent to the bank, instructions written in code, and financial statements that required months of analysis. Each discovery was a piece of a puzzle that Veronica and Dennis thought was impossible to solve. Finally, I found it. The exact account number linked to the forgotten trust fund. My heart pounded as I realized the power it held. Not only could I reclaim the 6.7 million they had stolen, but the fund contained additional investments that could secure my financial future beyond their reach. This was the turning point. The moment when the predator became the prey. The emotional confrontation was inevitable. I faced Veronica and Dennis at a meeting arranged under the guise of finalizing a settlement. I laid out the evidence, the accounts, the documents, and the legal proofs. Veronica's face turned pale. Dennis's smugness vanished. For the first time, they were speechless. I could see the panic in their eyes as they realized the tables had turned. "You stole from me," I said steadily. "You thought I was blind, weak, and finished. But my grandfather's foresight, combined with my persistence, has undone every move you made." Veronica's lips trembled. Dennis's jaw clenched. I watched the arrogance drain from their faces as the realization set in. I was in control now. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about justice, pride, and reclaiming a life that had been ripped away. And though I knew the legal battles weren't fully over, I had the upper hand. The proof was irrefutable, and the hidden account was untouchable by their schemes. By the end of that confrontation, I felt a wave of vindication. Every sleepless night, every moment of despair had led to this point. I had turned betrayal into triumph, humiliation into power, and loss into an unexpected blessing. This was more than just reclaiming my wealth. It was reclaiming my dignity, my family's legacy, and the confidence that no one could ever take what my grandfather and I had preserved. Even after the confrontation, I knew the battle wasn't completely over. Veronica and Dennis might have been blindsided, but they were cunning and relentless. Every step I took towards securing the 1960 account had to be deliberate and precise. One wrong move, and they could have tried to contest or manipulate the situation further. I returned to my small rental above the hardware store, clutching the legal documents that confirmed my control over the trust fund. That night, I sat alone, going through my grandfather's letters again, realizing the depth of his planning. He had anticipated decades of challenges, deceit, and betrayal. And he had built this account to survive everything, including people like Veronica. It was like he had left me a lifeline that only someone persistent and clever enough could use. I started contacting financial institutions to finalize access to the account. The bureaucratic process was tedious, but it gave me time to plan my next steps. Each phone call and signature brought me closer to securing my future and ensuring that Veronica and Dennis would never touch a penny. And yet, I couldn't ignore the emotional weight. Losing my marriage, my peace of mind, and the trust of loved ones had left scars that money alone couldn't heal. I thought about my kids and how Veronica had manipulated them, creating distance between us. That anger, that betrayal, fueled my determination to not just reclaim my money, but restore a sense of justice and control in my life. Through this process, I also realized something crucial. I wasn't just reclaiming wealth. I was reclaiming my narrative. For too long, Veronica and Dennis had controlled the story, turning my life into a nightmare while flaunting their victory. Now I held the proof, the leverage, and the means to write the ending. If you're watching this story unfold, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Comment below and let me know. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unbelievable true stories of betrayal and revenge. By midweek, I had everything in place to access the account. My pulse quickened as I prepared the final steps. This was the culmination of weeks of research, frustration, and determination. The moment I had feared and anticipated simultaneously was about to arrive. Veronica and Dennis would soon understand the consequences of underestimating me, and the secret my grandfather had kept for decades would finally be revealed. As I stared at the faded ink of my grandfather's notes, I couldn't help but smile. This was more than revenge. It was vindication, justice, and closure all rolled into one. And it all started because I refused to give up. Even when the world had turned against me, accessing the 1960 account was a surreal moment. I had spent weeks deciphering handwritten ledgers, cross-referencing dates, and verifying cryptic notes from my grandfather. And now, the reality of it was finally within reach. As I logged into the secure bank portal, my hands trembled slightly, a mixture of excitement, relief, and anticipation. The numbers on the screen confirmed what I had hoped. The account was untouched, fully funded, and legally mine. Every dollar that Veronica and Dennis had taken could now be reclaimed. I immediately contacted my attorney, who was equally astonished by the intricate structure of the trust fund. He explained how my grandfather had designed it to be nearly untouchable, even in the face of modern legal challenges. Veronica and Dennis had thought they could outsmart me. but my grandfather's foresight ensured that they had no legal ground to contest. The $6.7 million was safe, and the remaining assets could secure my future indefinitely. As the reality sank in, I realized that this victory went beyond finances. It was the first time in months that I felt a genuine sense of control over my life again. Every sleepless night, every moment of fear, and every tear shed in frustration now seemed justified. I had turned the most devastating betrayal of my life into an opportunity for redemption and empowerment. I began taking steps to recover the money Veronica had siphoned off. Each legal filing, each correspondence, and each transaction was carefully planned. I watched, often with a quiet satisfaction, as my ex-wife and her lawyer realized that their plan had unraveled. Their smugness was gone, replaced by panic and desperation. For the first time, they understood that their arrogance had been their undoing. The journey also gave me time to reflect on my relationships with my children. I reached out, not with anger, but with honesty about the situation. I shared pieces of the truth in ways they could understand without causing them distress. Slowly, trust began to rebuild, and they started to see their mother's actions in a new light. The money wasn't just about wealth anymore. It was about restoring fairness, integrity, and the sense of security that had been stolen from us. If you're watching this story and feeling inspired, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. There are more stories where people overcame unimaginable betrayal and reclaimed their lives. By the end of the month, I had regained full control of my assets, stabilized my financial situation, and even began planning to relaunch my business. The betrayal that had once seemed like the end of everything had become a catalyst for a fresh start. Grandpa's foresight had saved me, but my determination had made it real. I finally understood that true victory wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming your life, refusing to be broken, and using wisdom and perseverance to turn even the deepest wounds into triumph. And for me, the fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. With the 1960 account secured, I knew the next challenge would be finalizing my victory, legally and emotionally. Veronica and Dennis were still a threat. They had the audacity to think that somehow they could retaliate. But I was prepared. Every step I took from this point forward had to be precise, calculated, and unassailable. I arranged a meeting under the guise of a settlement discussion, knowing that their arrogance would bring them straight to me. Walking into the room, I felt the weight of every betrayal and every stolen moment. Veronica's smile faltered the instant our eyes met, and Dennis, ever the lawyer, tried to mask his surprise. But I could see it. The panic, the realization that their plan had finally unraveled. "I hope you enjoyed every second of thinking you had won," I said calmly, setting the stack of documents on the table. But the truth is, the victory was never yours. Their expressions shifted from smugness to disbelief as I methodically laid out the evidence. The trust fund, the legal documents, the proof of their illegal transfers, and the undisputable control I now had over the 1960 account. Dennis tried to interject, his voice trembling slightly. "Raymond, this isn't how it works." I cut him off. "It is exactly how it works. Everything you took, every scheme you executed, has been reversed, legally, authentically, completely." Veronica's face turned pale, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. As I walked them through the documentation, I reminded them that their actions weren't just immoral, they were criminal. Each step I had taken was meticulously recorded, leaving no room for manipulation or argument. They had underestimated me, assuming that loss and humiliation had broken me. They couldn't have been more wrong. The room felt charged with tension, a mix of disbelief, anger, and a quiet satisfaction that only comes from seeing justice unfold. I could almost feel the years of betrayal and pain being balanced by the triumph of meticulous planning and perseverance. This was more than revenge. It was vindication, a reclamation of my life, and a public acknowledgement that wrongdoing has consequences. If you're watching this story and want to see more shocking tales of betrayal and clever revenge, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. By the end of that day, I had not only reclaimed my finances, but had sent a clear message. Those who think they can manipulate, deceive, and destroy without consequence are in for the shock of their lives. Grandpa's foresight had been my shield. My intellect had been my sword, and together, we had won the battle that seemed impossible. Even after all this, I knew life would continue to throw challenges my way, but I was no longer the man who had been blindsided. I had the proof, the power, and the confidence to face any obstacle. And the feeling of seeing my betrayers finally powerless, stripped of their smugness and control, was more satisfying than any amount of money could ever be. Even after regaining control over my finances, I knew the story wasn't over. The lessons I had learned, the strategies I had uncovered, and the courage I had summoned were all part of a larger journey, one that went beyond money and revenge. I realized that true power comes not just from reclaiming what was stolen, but from understanding the game, anticipating betrayal, and acting decisively when opportunity arises. I began to organize my life, piece by piece. My children, initially distant and confused, slowly started to see the truth. I shared with them the lessons from my grandfather's foresight and the importance of integrity, patience, and vigilance. They began to reconnect, not out of obligation, but because they could now witness that justice had been served. Veronica and Dennis were still around, but their influence had waned. The legal documents, the trust fund, and the undeniable evidence of their wrongdoing had stripped them of power. They realized that manipulation could only go so far when met with intelligence and persistence. And for the first time, I saw them not as untouchable adversaries, but as flawed individuals whose overconfidence had been their undoing. During this period, I also reflected on my own journey. Losing nearly everything had been devastating, but it had forced me to confront my vulnerabilities and sharpen my instincts. I learned to recognize deception, to act strategically, and to value what truly matters: family, integrity, and self-respect. The money was important, yes, but the personal growth, the regained confidence, and the restored sense of control were priceless. If you're watching this and want to see more stories of betrayal, cunning, and ultimate revenge, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that will leave you in awe. I started planning the next phase of my life. The business I had lost could be rebuilt, this time with safeguards in place to prevent future betrayal. Investments could be expanded, and with my grandfather's foresight guiding me, I had the tools to ensure financial security and independence. It wasn't just about reclaiming what I lost. It was about building a future where nothing, no person, no scheme could threaten me again. I also took time to reflect on the nature of trust and betrayal. Veronica's actions had been shocking, but they revealed truths about human nature, greed, and the importance of vigilance. Dennis, once a polished and intimidating figure, was reduced to someone scrambling in the shadows, desperate to hold on to what he thought he controlled. The irony was delicious. As I looked over my life, I felt a deep sense of closure. The 1960 account, my grandfather's wisdom, and my relentless determination had not only restored what was mine, but had transformed me into someone stronger, wiser, and more resilient than I had ever been. And with every step forward, I knew that this story, my story, would serve as a warning and inspiration to anyone who has ever faced betrayal. With the 1960 account fully secured and my financial power restored, I began to see the real impact of what had happened. This wasn't just about reclaiming money. It was about reclaiming my life. The betrayal by Veronica and Dennis had left deep emotional scars. But the journey through those dark months had strengthened me in ways I could never have imagined. I had learned resilience, patience, and the value of strategy. I started rebuilding my relationships, especially with my children. They had been shielded from the full truth by Veronica. But slowly, I shared pieces of the story. Carefully, thoughtfully, and honestly. I explained how I had been deceived, how I had lost everything, and how I had managed to reclaim it through determination and the guidance of Grandpa's foresight. Watching them process the truth, and seeing trust slowly return in their eyes, was a victory that no amount of money could ever match. At the same time, Veronica and Dennis tried to regain control, but it was futile. Every attempt they made to challenge me legally or financially was thwarted by the airtight structure of the 1960 account and the meticulous records I had collected. Their arrogance, which had once made them untouchable, was now their downfall. I realized that revenge wasn't about cruelty. It was about restoring balance and proving that deceit could never triumph over persistence and preparation. As I finalized the legal processes, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From the crushing humiliation in the courthouse, to living in a rental above a hardware store, to deciphering decades-old documents, every step had taught me something invaluable. I had learned to trust my instincts, to embrace patience, and to use intelligence and resourcefulness as weapons against those who sought to harm me. If you're watching this and feeling inspired, make sure to comment below where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories of betrayal, strategy, and ultimate revenge. I also realized the importance of gratitude. My grandfather's wisdom had been the invisible hand guiding me through this storm. His foresight, combined with my determination, had ensured that the betrayal I suffered could never truly destroy me. It had created an opportunity, A chance to not just reclaim what was mine, but to rebuild stronger than ever. By the end of this chapter, I had reclaimed the 6.7 million, regained control of my business, and secured the financial foundation for my family's future. The emotional closure, the restored trust with my children, and the justice served against those who had tried to destroy me were victories far greater than money alone could offer. This story is proof that even in the darkest times, there is hope. Betrayal can be devastating, but with perseverance, strategy, and a bit of inherited wisdom, it is possible to turn tragedy into triumph and ensure that justice prevails. The dust had finally settled. Veronica and Dennis had retreated, their schemes dismantled and their arrogance exposed. The $6.7 million was safely back in my hands, and the additional assets from Grandpa's 1960 account ensured a secure future for me and my children. I could finally breathe without the constant weight of betrayal pressing down on me. Life slowly returned to normal, but normal now had a different meaning. I no longer measured success solely by wealth or status. I measured it by the lessons I had learned, the resilience I had built, and the relationships I had repaired. Every smile from my children, every word of trust regained, and every step toward rebuilding my business reminded me that true victory isn't just about reclaiming what was lost. It's about growing stronger through the adversity. Veronica and Dennis faded from my life, just as shadows disappear when the sun rises. Their betrayal had been painful, but it had also awakened a side of me I hadn't known existed, a side capable of patience, strategy, and relentless determination. I understood now that even the deepest wounds could be transformed into sources of power. As I stood overlooking the city from my rebuilt office, I thought of my grandfather. His foresight had given me the tools to turn despair into triumph, but it was my persistence, courage, and refusal to give up that had sealed the outcome. His legacy was not just financial. It was a lesson in resilience and the power of preparation. This story is a reminder. Betrayal can come from those closest to you, but it doesn't define you. With patience, intelligence, and unwavering resolve, it is possible to reclaim your life and emerge stronger than ever. Where are you watching from? Comment below, and make sure to subscribe to our channel for more shocking true stories of betrayal, strategy, and ultimate revenge.